Just want to say this is our 13th meeting, and I really appreciate the steering committee being here. And I want to welcome some of you who are brand new to these meetings. Thank you so much for coming. Community engagement is a big part of what we want to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the first thing on the agenda is approving the minutes from August. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Thank you, Robert. A second? Thanks, Alex. All in favor of approving the minutes from August as they were presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say aye. And if you abstain, also now speak up. Okay, super. Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and start with the co-chair's report that's next on our agenda. So again, we just want to welcome those of you who this is your first time or second or third time to the AIM meeting. And as I've already said, this is our 13th meeting. We have been soliciting community input all along, through our workshops and our listening sessions and the polls, but we're so glad that you're here, for sure. For those of you that are a member of the committee, before I actually talk more about that, I just want to thank you guys because, as you remember, when we first started last September, we were supposed to be done around the end of August, and early this summer we asked you to continue on. So thank you for continuing to show up at least through December to talk about these things. We're really grateful for your time, and that of course extends to the 50 other citizens that are serving on our subcommittees. We just want to acknowledge that tonight, all the work that's being done on all the other master plans as well. So because we do have new people here tonight, we just wanted to level set at the beginning. These meetings really don't have, unfortunately, a place for public comment. They never have, because these are working sessions of the steering committee. But because Siobhan and I are so very much interested in hearing directly from you, we have actually set up to meet at the Nancy O'Brien Center on Monday at 6 p.m. And it'll just be the two of us there to hear what you have to say about the AIM process and respond to you as we can. And where we can't respond because we don't know the answer, we'll carry that information back to our consultants, our staff, our committee members, so that they can, think about what the right response is. We really do want to hear from you because this is supposed to be a citizen-engaged process, as all of us are sitting around these tables. We are all citizens, and we've been engaged in this process since September. But we do really want to hear from you, particularly those of you that have taken the time to send us emails and call us. Thank you so much for doing that, by the way. I do want to say one thing about the reason for this process. So there were three things that really drove us needing to have the AIM process kick off. One of them was the fact that the current plan we're under is actually expiring. So that's kind of like a reason you got to get going, right? The second is that we know Norman has been growing. And so we have to start thinking about how are we going to accommodate those people in terms of housing, our water supply, the parks they want to hang out in, all of those things. And that's another big reason for having this process ongoing. And then the third, and the thing that really I think kick-started everything, was the announcement of the Access Project back in February of 2022. Did I said that right? Yeah, 2022. And so really the point of the plan, and the reason that the Turnpike is drawn on the plan is not because we want that Turnpike to happen. It's because we need to make sure, or actually I can't speak for everyone, I don't want the Turnpike to happen, but if it does happen, we want to make sure that we, the citizens, are saying what should happen around it. I personally don't want to repeat the I-35 corridor along the north of Norman if that's what ends up happening in terms of the Turnpike. But by engaging in a sort of proactive, thoughtful process in terms of land use, we are saying what we want and don't want to happen should that Turnpike happen. So that's the reason. And I know that the City Council just had this resolution go through. I do want you to know that they are informed. Every other month we have sessions with the City Council, so they've been a part of this journey from the beginning, where we sit down with them, and the city staff, Siobhan and me, the consultants, kind of show where we are in the process. And thus far, they ask great questions every time, but they have been supportive of that, including as recently as the middle of August. So everyone has been informed, and just so that you know, you can go to the AIM Norman website anytime you want to see where we are in terms of the maps and other information, because it's all posted there for you to see. So hopefully with that, we can continue on because we have a very packed agenda. But again, I just want to repeat that Siobhan and I will be at the Nancy O'Brien Center at 6 p.m. on Monday. This Monday, what's the date? What is it? 16th. The 16th? The 16th, okay, thanks. Do you have anything you want to add?
I do have kind of a housekeeping thing. Next month is our, I think it's October 10, October 9. That is NPS fall break. Is anyone going to be affected by that on the committee? Okay, myself as well. Okay, so we will get back to you. We just want to make sure we have quorum so that we can have a meeting and do what we need to do. And we'll send out an email to everyone to make sure we get everyone's response to that.
Okay, super. All right, with that, Amy, you want to run up? You are going to take your report out?
Okay, all right. Thanks, everyone. Great to see everybody again, enjoying the weather. So our usual, we want to give a little bit of an update on the public engagement, and then we also have an update on the character area map. So we'll talk through that a little bit. Make sure I get back onto the right screen here. Yep. Okay, so we are so I discovered this, and Richard, based on the conversation we were having earlier today, I realized the problem I was having every time I was looking down at the screen as I was trying to walk through my bifocal lens. We were having a discussion about
I see
bifocals.
this for the first time. This is amazing.
Okay, I can read this now. So we've had about 993 visits this month to the project website, for a total of over 19,000. Again, I always have the reminder that's not unique visits, but we've had a total of 19,000 visits. This month we have 211 people respond to the survey that we currently have up, for a total of about 3,200, almost 3,300 responses that we've had over the last, I think this is probably our 11th or 12th survey question that we've had up on the website. So this month we went back and asked some very specific questions around the parks plan. And the first one of that was, would you support commercial development impact fee being used to support trails and beautification? So we had 211 responses. 88 of those strongly supported and 54 supported. So that was, I think we shared this last night with the folks from the Parks Board, and they were pretty excited to see that result. The next one we had was, would you support neighborhood development impact fee being expanded to support park and recreation, cultural centers, and strongly 57 support at 63. So again, pretty good majorities there that we were seeing in supporting those changes. Would you favor a new multicultural, multidisciplinary community arts center and hub? And 80 folks out of the 211 said yes, and 64 said I don't know. And usually we always offer that I don't know because a lot of people are kind of like, I want more information before I can answer that. So that was where a lot of those responses, I'm sure, came from. So maybe I will back up here a little bit too, and Molly can maybe speak to this even a little bit better than I can, but part of the reason they asked this question about the impact fee is this fee hasn't changed in like 30 years. It was established in the 1990s. So that's one of the reasons they wanted to kind of be gauging, we probably need to hit the refresh button on that. So they just wanted to kind of gauge community support for that. So questions on the questions or the polls? Okay. I'm going to come back. The other piece is a little bit about schedule, and maybe we'll just kind of hit on that at the end of the night. I'm going to do this. I didn't test this part here, so hopefully this works better. Trying to do a split screen so you can see both maps at the same time. So let's see if that works. I think it's gonna work. Let me get some boxes out of the way so you can see that better. Okay, so just as a little bit of a reminder and refresher of where we are and how we got to here. I believe it was the May meeting, one of the things that we heard, or what we took away from the May meeting is, okay, maybe back you can further here, so we're looking at these maps. As a reminder, the kind of brown area here is the 2045 reserve. That was one of the feedbacks that we took, was that the label didn't really match the text and the policies and the words we were using there. So we've relabeled that to the 2045 reserve. The purple bluish area is just to the west of it is our the development area that would be occurring during the life of this plan. So the 20-year life of this plan. So one of the things, if you remember right, we talked about back in May was the dividing line between those two areas being a little bit more of a natural boundary than just picking a street like 48th and saying that's going to be our boundary, because there was there was really good discussion around if and when infrastructure comes to 48th, it wouldn't really make sense that it would be kind of that you would just utilize all that infrastructure on one side of the street. And so we had that conversation around let's follow a natural boundary. So we did the natural boundary. I think we came back in June, and we heard that went too far. So that's the one on the left here. The one on the left of the screen is the one from June. And so what we did was we took it and said, okay, let's start pulling it back. Let's see where we can find some tops of those ridge lines, and that are a little bit closer to the half section line, closer to 48th. So this is where we are right now. And I tried to highlight the thicker green line is 48th, the thicker green line, the thicker red line.
Do you have anything you can point to?
It gets lost on these screens. So it's not like a projector when you do the laser pointer, sometimes it gets, but okay, so this is 48th, this is 60th. The thick line is 48th, the thin line is 60th. So what we will do, I know that everybody's just kind of seeing this, so wanted to answer any questions you have. We've also taken a lot of feedback on the text itself. So we're going to get, after this meeting, we'll have in your Google Drive this updated map for everybody to kind of look at a little bit closer, and to look at some of the text and policy pieces that you gave us some feedback on too, that we've incorporated into those pieces. So I guess, questions?
What is the purple line that goes east, west?
This is for the committee, sorry.
When we move this back, what does that do to the future housing trends?
It doesn't really change it much at all, because that does tie in, and I'll talk a little bit about the land use piece of it too. It really doesn't impact that too much, because one of the things, if you remember last month, I kind of gave the report out that we were looking at adding density. So we've done that, and then the link, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about the other land use map. And just as a reminder, this isn't a zoning map. This is a character area map. So this is a map to help us provide policies for areas that have common characteristics. And then we have the land use map. So one of the things that we heard from everybody in July was, where can we continue to add some density back in and take some of those areas that were medium and maybe make them high, and some that were low and make them higher, and do that. So that's in that version that was in Inger's email, and that we are continually updating. So that is one that when you look at it, I mean, we even had some edits we were making today of like, that's not, I mean, a good example is where we were having a conversation with Taylor today about where's that station around the OU campus going to be. That's going to move that TOD because it's not there now. They're moving it down a little bit closer to Lindsay is the most recent discussion. So we're literally making those changes all the time as we get those kind of information pieces.
That piece may be moving.
Yeah. They're right now, the one that was up there closer to
Brooks.
Brooks, thank you. It's like on the tip of my tongue. The one that was up there by Brooks.
I thought it was always at Lindsay, so that's why I was
Yeah, no, we had it at Brooks for some
Oh,
reason,
okay.
so we're correcting it.
Okay, good, okay. I was about to say, that's the land I'm already trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
So we had it wrong on that, but those are the things that we're trying to catch and correct, and we're reevaluating the numbers, and the numbers are looking really good right now, so we were just rerunning those kind of this morning. It is a little bit of an undertaking to rerun the numbers, so we try to get through a number of edits and rerun the numbers.
So just for clarity, the purple line is Alameda, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And the purple, we've used a lot of different colors in a lot of different maps. The purple is
Is
a
the-
local corridor?
Is the local corridor, yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
just making sure.
Yep. Yes.
So I'm a non-voting ex officio member, so I pay attention to what we vote on, what we don't vote on. And I'm also listening carefully to comments about, well, we don't want this, but well, some of us don't want this, and some of us do. And I've seen one actual vote being taken, and that was about the future population actually had a vote. So then when you say, well, we did the graph, I guess on the right or left, and we heard that's too far. But haven't missed a meeting, I haven't seen any votes.
There was no official vote, yeah.
And so when you say, we heard that, well, my question then is about process.
Sure.
So if you have 2 or 3 vocal people who call you, or it's the chairs or vice chairs or whatever, and they say, we don't like that, how does that find its way back to us as a group? Because we've had ongoing dialogue that, well, some of these things, some of us do like, some of us don't like, and they seem to kind of get a life of their own, and then the next drawing we see is different. And so I think if we're doing that, we ought to have a show of hands, or, if we've got, people that are talking about this, we do like it, we don't like it. It seemed to me that moving these lines around based on what you heard or what we went too far, that wouldn't be a very good process to me.
Yeah, and I think probably what I would want, and so I will say, so a couple things is that we did have conversations, or I did with all of the committee members, that was part of it, and then taking just kind of what we were hearing as a good kind of, I think we even kind of went around.
Steering committee.
Yeah, the steering committee members, yeah, and talking with them. I think that might be something we want to talk about in October, is everybody just saw this tonight. I'm not going to ask everybody to kind of vote on something they're just seeing for the first time, but that might be something we want to talk about. We could talk about with Inger that we might want to do. It wouldn't be voting for the plan or anything like that in October, but we could discuss that.
Because I'm an appointed voting member of the Transportation Committee, and we did take a vote,
Right.
count the hands, we've done that, and that hasn't made it here. And so those are things that I'm a little, like, so is this going to be validated in some way? Is it just who can yell the loudest the longest? Is it?
Well, ultimately, yes, there will be a vote. There has to be. It has to be recommended. That will, the plan, that our schedule is that would happen in, I guess I probably went over that. I don't.
No, I understand.
No,
But as we're
but
going
that
along-
will happen in
As we're
December,
going through the
yeah.
process and things are being
Right.
changed, at the end, someone will vote on that. Well, if there's some things back here that are in that plan that we didn't intend to be in the plan that way. And so I'm just seeing that moment in the
Real
future.
quick, sorry to jump in front of you, Richard. What happened, what did you vote on at the transportation committee that you do not see on here?
Well, that,
No, I think you're just saying that the plan hasn't been brought to here yet.
correct.
Yeah, he's just saying the
Okay,
transportation.
that's what I meant.
And then, can you let Amanda go?
Yeah.
Oh, I just, to that point, which I think is a good question that Chuck just made, is yes, the steering committee members, I don't know who all participated, but did have one-on-ones in late July, early August, I'm guessing, with Amy. And while I appreciated that time, most of my comments were really about process and less about the land use, because 30 minutes goes by really quick. So I never got there. But I would really like to see a summary of those discussions. I don't, while I appreciate the time, if it should move a line on this map, but based on those private discussions, I don't like that as part of the process. So I really want to understand, this whole group to understand what was discussed, because we didn't have it as a group. And I think that's vitally important. So if lines move because of that process, that is a concern for me as well.
Yeah, and I think,
I'm not saying we did.
Yeah, no, and I probably, I just want to correct something. I maybe said it, I maybe made it sound like this line was based on those conversations in July. The conversations in July probably influenced the land use map more than this.
I mean, I'll say, I
Yeah,
heard the
I-
public and every public forum we had want us to move that line back. So while it hasn't maybe been a huge topic in this meeting, I have heard it from all over the community at the open houses you had in the spring. So I do agree with that sentiment. I'm just saying, if it got moved because of those one-on-ones, you know, that's
This
not
one,
right.
yes, and that's where I was trying to
Sorry,
correct myself.
I do think Chuck has a point.
Yeah, and I just want to say, building on your point, Chuck, I could not agree more, that process is critical. And so what happened in May, and I'm sorry to like make us all go in a time machine, is that if you remember, we worked in small groups, and a couple of us, like one group, some people said that they wanted to follow the natural, the sort of the natural ridges, and another group presented about, you know, kind of going really far, like, well, what that map on the left showed, further east. And it was interpreted as consensus, when that's not what happened. It wasn't consensus. And so that's why it got pulled back, because we were like, whoa, that was one group. It wasn't consensus. And so, just to be completely transparent with you, that's what happened. So so that's why it got pulled back, because just as Amanda said, what we've heard from the public is stay on the other side of 48th or at 48th. Yes, sorry.
Some of the public
Thank you so
attended
much for
meetings
saying
that
that.
spoke
Yes,
up there.
yes,
But other parts of the citizenry weren't there at those moments, and so.
100%.
I
But-
hear a lot,
but in
like you, I'm getting a lot, my ears eaten off.
Right,
And
yeah.
hearing things going different directions, I go, that's just not how it's going, I'm sorry, and I think there are valid, vocal individuals out in the community who understand the housing needs and.
Absolutely.
And yes, Turnpike, no Turnpike, I mean, there's a lot going on, as you know more than anyone else. But I do think that it seems to me like that what happens here, I mean, I prefer, everybody in favor, say aye. I mean, we're really taking a lot of this kind of, well, that was consensus, that wasn't consensus. Oh, we thought everyone liked that, everyone who liked that.
Exactly.
And I think we're going to get in a lot of trouble if we kind of keep going by,
Yeah.
oh, I like that, I didn't like it,
Yeah.
and I like that.
And like I said, I mean, I could not agree with you more in terms of like the process was a little mushy
Very,
going back
very
then. To put it- So I appreciate your raising that
That's
up.
all I have to say.
Well, and
And-
I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
and I do want to, I mean, we walked out of the room with the understanding that there was a consensus around following a natural boundary. Now, and I also personally was under the assumption that that meant that we would be adjusting that over some time because of things we learned from our, you know, from the city engineering and the water wastewater plans and the storm, all of those things. So those are all things we're trying to take into consideration. Sorry, Richard, you've been waiting for a while. Go ahead.
Well, along these lines, I've been studying the draft land use map. There's a piece of land up just south of Indian Hills Road, east of the railroad tracks, fully developed in 5-acre tracts. Houses out there would sell for over $500,000. They're houses that were built in the 70s. And it's shown right here as urban high. And that's 12 to 18 units per acre. That isn't going to happen between now and 2045. That isn't going to happen even longer into the future. And so there's a lot of things we're sitting here telling ourselves about, oh, this can accommodate housing, and it isn't. It's not enough land, and it isn't going to accommodate the housing needs. And we have to have an honest discussion about all that. You go exactly 2 miles south, and we have a transit-oriented development, and it's not in our key as to like what kind of density that is, but normally it's pretty high density. You can't even get to that land. It's all industrial now. You can't, I mean, we can't sit here and say, oh, we've accommodated the growth with things that are fictional. And to Chuck's point, we have to have a real discussion of what's really going to happen, how much land does it really take, and then actually have an informed discussion about where that line goes. And it isn't about opinion, it's math. It's math. And there's stuff on here that is mathematically not gonna happen. And I am very frustrated.
And it's a process that we're trying to continue to, like I said, every day we're finding things that we, and trying to talk with folks and make sure we're getting things as close to where we need them to be.
We shouldn't be having this discussion today when we don't know the math as to make an informed decision on this. This is just an opinion, not based on any math.
This is the character area map, though, which it should be separate from, and I can appreciate what you're
totally driving this map.
That hasn't changed based on the character area map. I don't think I'm trying to.
Can I ask a question? When did you implement here?
When did you do
The survey, when was that?
You did one maybe in June.
Did that have these questions on it?
No, I don't think it did. It did? Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry, it did, yes, you're right, we did have some of those character area map ones, yes.
That's when we had a really robust discussion about moving it.
We also
Yeah,
had
I know that.
How about, it was really about,
Yeah.
protecting the lake and the
in June, that was the focus of June.
And to be honest with you, I think that's about the only, like, super honest productive discussion we've had as a group since this process started. Feels like, so, sometimes it's uncomfortable. It could get uncomfortable. We can't be scared of that because we've been tasked with a job to make some really hard decisions. And the time is running out. And the process hasn't been 100% clean. It's been unclear. And it might be time for us to have those hard discussions. I'm not necessarily saying right now this minute, but before we make any decisions. Because Richard has issues, I'm not sure everybody in the room is even comfortable with those lines yet. They can be focused discussions, but we gotta have them.
Agreed, and that's why that's why this is up here right now. So, start having a discussion, I guess.
Well, just a little history.
Yeah.
Last time we did this, we spent $500,000 and we didn't adopt a plan. Because it came in, well, we want all of Main Street, this needs to be multi-family coming through here and everything, like on where the Walmart is, the Best Buy, that was all gonna be apartment complexes. You're like, I don't think Walmart's gonna tear Walmart down and become apartments. And so it wasn't really, we didn't dive down deep enough to say, when you look at it from this 30,000 feet, yeah, that's where it should go.
Yeah.
As opposed to, yeah, but it can't go there.
Right.
This would be a great place for it. There's a football stadium there. Okay, that's not moving. Those type of things.
Agreed.
And so, like I was talking about here, if we're going to do those lots, you're like, it's not available. Or Norman Public Schools owns it, or the county owns it, or something like that.
Agreed.
Institutional type stuff that's just not going to happen. And I think you got to. When we get to that point, I want to drill down a little bit. I know we're not there yet, but process-wise, at the end of the day, we have to kind of step back and kind of look at, is this workable? As opposed to, that's what happened last time. We wasted $500,000 and didn't get anything.
So what's the most efficient way to do that? Like Richard has really good insight that you just shared about that can't happen there. How do we get to the point where we identify, where we sort of line up what may be sort of projected in terms of land use and what is real in terms of land use, even like Robert, what you said, who owns it or what can be done there?
That was kind of like, I think we were at a meeting with the very first one, I kind of mentioned one of my deals was, is it practical? Does it make sense? Are we going to get there? Hey, we did all this, but we only came up with 18,000 units, and we need 20. Or we came up with 25, we don't need that much, so let's, I don't know if we've gotten there yet, but does the math work? And can you actually do that?
Well, it sounds to me like there's two things. There's both making the math work, but then also what's actually happening on that land that is projected to accommodate a certain amount of growth. Can that growth even happen there, given the fact that there's a Walmart on that corner, or whatever?
And then the math doesn't work, so you kind of got to go back and forth, maybe adjust it for those type of things. And I just want to make sure that we don't plan for areas of, or hey, that's in the floodplain.
Right.
Yeah, I know we're not doing the floodplain stuff, but, it's like that example, but.
We've been asking for this for months, to spend time working on this map. And we still haven't, it's not.
One of the things we were
asked to do it as like homework to go and I'll do it. But I'm looking at stuff here that like, I don't understand what this map is telling us. It's showing 12 to 18 units to the acre on already developed land. I don't know how to calculate that.
I
We don't
will
know how to
say,
read this map.
yeah.
We don't know how to work with it because we haven't spent any time on it. That's very frustrating. We really haven't.
Not to like throw out the idea of adding another committee, but I mean, I trust Richard's knowledge on this much more than I trust my own. And I know we're late in the game to start the committee, but is there the ability in the process to start that working group or the next month to be the ones that dig in and have them present to us?
It's actually something we were discussing.
Okay, sweet. And I think that's a great idea.
Hold a few people who are in the weeds a little bit more on,
That's a great suggestion, Jake, thanks.
So to circle back from where we started, the map on the left is a map we've seen before. The map on the right is a map we have not seen before. And there is narrative to go along with the map that we haven't seen before, but we haven't seen that yet either.
You've seen that narrative, we've just done a lot of the updates that you guys gave us.
Okay, so, yeah, that's part of,
The
I think,
comments
what
and
we've been
stuff you
asking
did.
for of, there, is this continuous feedback? And, when we see changes in the map, to have some kind of summary of what those changes are and why they've been made and how it affects, the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think, sorry, when I say yes, I guess in my head, I was making sure I understand what you were saying there, but this was an opportunity to explain the reasoning for the changes, and here's the change, and now you'll have, here's the updated map and text and stuff.
I don't think there's who's deciding. Who is deciding? Is it the steering committee members talking to you individually? Is it your group? Is it, who is deciding? And this is one of lots of different kinds of things as it relates to parks and stormwater. And I'm, like I said, I'm sitting here going, well, that was different than last time. And well, we all think, well, not we all think. Some of us do, some of us don't. And so I'm ready to vote. If we're going to say, well, this should be here, all in favor, opposed, nay, drive on. Here's the vote, 8-4, whatever it was. Because it seems to me like we just keep talking about, well, we like this, we don't like that, or we've listened to this, we have these comments. Well, there's a lot of people live in Norman and a lot of different comments, and I think we could be being led astray a little bit by listening to one voice different than another voice. And we've got some good steering committee members here, and they're appointed by the city council, they're authorized to vote. And if we're going to decide which direction our community is going to go, and we have different opinions, I think that's when you vote. And if we've got your team or other teams that are saying, well, I heard more of this and less of that, so I'm going to do it like this, I think that's inappropriate.
I agree with you about voting, and it was something I suggested in my one in July with Amy, like, we gotta vote on that land use map before we get to the end and vote on the whole package. But I can tell you, me personally, I'm not ready to vote on that. I feel like, I made it clear in June that there's some assurances I'd like to see that help protect the lake and the aquifer. Those aren't set in stone yet. So it's not something, while I'm certainly open to compromise, and if we can get assurances set, maybe this is something I'm willing to consider, but I'm not willing to go there yet, just as a voting steering committee member. So, I don't want to push people out of their comfort zone and make them vote when they don't have all the information they need. But I do absolutely agree. We need to vote on that land use map, and we need to put it to bed when we're ready.
I agree.
And keep in mind too, so the agenda for October was almost exactly what we're describing here. I don't know, we hadn't finalized whether or not it would be a time we would take a vote or not, but it's an opportunity for us to just focus on draft material and where we're at and where we need to be getting us to a December vote. So we're not trying to rush or shove anything, we're not trying to rush this.
But, and you know my opinion on this, I feel like we should be talking about the map every single meeting, because I think that there's so much to it, it's very complicated. There are lots of things to consider, and so I feel like, not dissimilar to Amanda, that like, there's still parts of it that we haven't discussed. And so it feels a little early to vote, but again, voting does help us move down the field. So it's kind of like, yeah, we need to do both. Have regular conversations and not wait until October. So that when we do get to October, we have all really wrestled with the information, I think. And I mean,
Yeah, that's why, we want to get this out to you, and then, because that's 4 weeks, so, yeah.
And then I need to clarify, like, we've used 2 terms, and I think, kind of sloppily, this is the character map, and then we also have the land use map. Do we have 2 separate votes, or is it one considering both at the same time? But that's a question, not a rhetorical comment. What do you all think? Do we vote for these independently, like, here, we approved this character map, now let's go to the land use map, or do we need to be seeing both at the same time to vote on them? You see what I'm saying?
I don't understand the purpose of the character map. I feel like the land use map and the categories within it should have descriptions and policies for them, instead of 2 different maps that have similar, I guess, things, but also different things in them. I don't know, I just don't understand. I wouldn't want to vote on 2 different things, and I don't understand why one exists, I guess.
That's a great point.
So I would like to see some of the policies that are in the character map things be applied to the land use map, which feels like a more tangible zoom down to the street, see what is where, and vote on that, as opposed to this very broad thing.
So could you like explain to us, again, the character area map versus the land use, how they're supposed to work and kind of be seen, and then I guess maybe as a group we should decide, make a decision as to whether or not we want to take them up individually in terms of voting, or look at them both together and vote for them at the same time, or maybe we, as Charles has suggested, maybe we don't need the character map, I don't know, so.
I think we just combine them into one map, and it feels like that should be the land use map, because that has all the specifics, more or less, in it, and then have the policies of the character map ascribed to those different land use types.
So the character area map is is a way of identifying areas with kind of common or similar policies that you might not have necessarily at the land use level. So what do I mean by that? Okay, we might have a medium urban, or urban medium, excuse me. We might have an urban medium area that's closer to an older neighborhood, or whether it's the mid-century or core neighborhood. And the policies that we would have for that medium urban would be different than a new what we would call a greenfield development, where we're going to go out and start all new development. Stormwater is probably a great example of that. So in those areas where we're identifying our core neighborhoods and our mid-century neighborhoods, we have policies around stormwater that talk about what we need to maybe be doing to improve stormwater in those areas, addressing things that maybe weren't done, 30, 40, 50 years ago, that we know how to do them better now. Though we wouldn't have those same policies in a medium urban land use designation out in a new new development area. We would want some policies that are around that new construction sorts of standards. So that's the reason for kind of the policy map. It's trying to find areas with kind of these common characteristics and trying to identify what are the proper policies that we want to have for those common characteristics. So the maps should be working together.
If I may,
Yeah, it's a policy
Put it on
map.
separate.
That's exactly, it's usually what it's a lot of times what we would call it. We would call it a policy map.
So one of the ways I've thought about this, and this may be a dumb analogy, but I liked it, is I think about it like a library. So do we have nonfiction? Do we have fiction? Do we have poetry? Those are kind of the overarching categories in those different areas of the library, and we're seeing how many books in each one of those sections do we have. Now, do we have enough biographies? Do we have enough science? Do we have enough natural history? How much volume within that library is being taken up from the nonfiction section? And so the different land uses might be those individual parcels that we put together that comprise them.
Are you part of the committee?
I'm a consultant.
You're a consultant, okay. I just didn't know.
You're fine.
We're not allowed to talk, so.
So I don't know if that helps, like, explain maybe some of the character areas and what we're trying to get to, and then the various components that the land use fall underneath within each one of those sections.
That makes sense. I just want to make sure that we have like policies in place. And it felt like that applied to the land use map, but I can see where you're saying medium urban in one place is not going to be the same as medium urban in another place. So it makes sense to, I guess, vote on them both because one is going to drive policy and the other drives.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what that would be.
As something that comes to the planning department, as somebody wants to do a project, they're going to look at both of those. Are we applying the policies to that area? And then we're also going to look at the very specific land use too.
So they're dependent on one another. You can't do them separate. Because if, like Robert was saying, if you can't fit a certain amount in a certain space, that space is going to expand. And therefore, the character map would have to expand. But they're so independent. You couldn't do one and then say, okay, we're set. Let's do the other. So that assessment has to be done first. And they both just got to be done at the exact same time.
Because they do work in partnership together, yes. And that was part of the reason why we wanted back in, I think it was May or June, we were kind of saying, I think you probably need to start seeing the land use pieces too. The other part of it that's also challenging with the policy pieces is there are certain policy pieces that are going to get very, very, very specific. And they need to be in there, but they probably don't belong in the land use section. They might belong in the housing chapter, or they might belong in the stormwater chapter. And that's the other part of like, at what point do we say this is a very specific policy? It needs to be in the document, but does it belong in a land use section of the document?
I just want to make, sorry, it's a process point for subcommittees. You know, we're going to have a great storm, hopefully, if we don't run out of time, great stormwater presentation tonight, and the committee has not worked on the policy recommendations based on the character map. So what are the stormwater recommendations for the area in Brown? We've not worked in that vein. We have worked from a living document that was created in 2009 that needs updates. And then, of course, there's going to be additional recommendations made, especially if we're talking about developing new areas of town. But also, as we're redeveloping areas in town, we have to, talk about retrofitting and stormwater solutions to help with flooding. But we've not organized our document, nor talked about it in the vein of, here's the character area, and these are the stormwater policies that should apply. And I've been to every other subcommittee meeting, and nobody else has talked about it in that vein either.
And that's correct. That's the correct way you should be doing it.
Is not talking about it in that way?
Correct,
What I'm
because
saying.
your policy, your things are getting more specific, are probably getting even more specific, and that's why they need to be, they'll be in this document, they'll be in the comprehensive plan, but they're going to be in your stormwater chapter.
Okay.
So it's, yes.
I just want to know if that leap gets made, that these policies are applicable to these character areas.
Yeah.
Whether that be transportation, water, wastewater, stormwater.
The
Like,
policy-
will that leap happen if you're reading the document? I don't know. I mean, I don't know yet, but there has to be some, if we're talking about policy per character area, and we're updating all these master plans or doing new ones, where are those drawn together to make sense, to a cohesion? That's something to think about.
Because kind of like stormwater, it is what it is. I mean, certain areas that need infrastructure, regardless of the character.
That's right, and that infrastructure differs which also, much like the character area is different.
True, true.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're,
So-
yeah.
And, correct me if I'm wrong, so stormwater is good. We, in kind of core Norman areas, we talk about, there's a policy in there about as projects are done or street improvements are done, infrastructure or stormwater should be addressed and updated. That's the policy. Now, how that gets done, like the specifics of that is a policy that I would see being in the stormwater chapter. Yes.
So what does that mean, that you could work on strictly the land use portion and only worry about policies for land use, and at the very end, back out the policies for the.
I mean, I don't know, I don't want to redo we've worked really hard on this. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the stormwater master plan, but it's almost as big as this table. And we've worked really hard on updating that and making additions to it, but not in this context. Of course, it's all related, but it's not in this context and laid out in the way we were just discussing based on Charles' comments, which I think were really valid. So I'm just trying to understand that we come out with a product that everybody's expecting as a subcommittee chair.
And part of it, I'm going to look a little bit too, but I mean, when we get into the stormwater piece, they're going to have a policy that they're reviewing in the land use plan that says the stormwater needs to be addressed. Then they're going to look to engineering of how that gets implemented and their specific policy for how it gets implemented. So their policy of like, this needs to be addressed is in their chapter that they're owning. And then how it gets implemented is the policy that comes out of engineering. Is that?
Thank you.
I want to go back just to, I guess, just the practicality thing that's happening. It's still like the zoning maps, which feel close to the land use map. That's where like all the codes and policies are located. So if there's an R1 in one part of town and R1 in another part of town, are the policies really going to be pulled from this character map, or are they just going to fall out from what we know as zoning already?
Yeah, so so zoning is a separate, so zoning is the code that helps to start to implement this. And where it's specifically, like, so if somebody comes in and wants to do something in an R1, they're zoned R1, and they want to do something that meets the R1 district, they can just do it. Right? I mean, where it comes in is they want to change that R1 district. They want to change the zoning in that area. Then we're using this plan to guide those decisions. Or they want to come in and do a PUD, or what, they're using this plan to guide those decisions. The code that's there, the code that's in place is, that's what's there today, and that's what will continue to have to be applied unless somebody wants to come in and change it.
But the city council has said that once this is adopted, that they are willing to change zoning and look at that. Because as we've mentioned several times, we haven't had a change since 1954.
I would hope that it changes. I guess, if we're putting a lot of effort into this policy map, that the policies fall into the zoning / land use map.
Yeah, the zoning is where the detail comes in of saying, when we say, in the policy, it might say adequate buffering. And what does adequate mean? Like, that's the zoning piece of saying we want this much of a setback.
And I think there's been a lot of recognition about that this is a process. And the land use piece must be addressed first. But we also recognize that because of land use changes, and the way that we think about it today versus how we thought about it in the 90s when the old land use plan was put together, we recognize that we have an outdated zoning code. We haven't changed our zoning code since 1954. So I think there already is a plan to address zoning following this process, right?
And this process should usually states, and they're enabling the legislation will say that this plan should inform your zoning code. The zoning code shouldn't be established arbitrarily. It should be based on and informed by a planning document like this. So it's a key part to be able to get to that next step of updating the zone.
If there's a conflict or maybe a gray area between the character map and the land use plan, what rules today, where does the city council, planning commission go to make their decision on a proposal?
Between the character area map and the land use,
Yeah.
hopefully we'll have all of that resolved. I mean, those will be resolved before we get to this point. But I would say probably, you know, I'm trying to think of an instance where, there's a lot of, in the policies, there is a lot of similarities between, you know, we want to improve our stormwater. Try to think about that in the conflict piece.
Would one document trump the other?
One map? Not necessarily. I mean, the land use map is still the land use map, so it would not get trumped by the character area map. Because that's going to be the first thing that when you think about the zoning, that it needs to look at the land use map. The character is just the policies. Yeah. Yeah. So I hadn't thought about it that way, but I guess the land use would trump. Yeah. But I don't see that being probably an issue. I'm trying to think through like where we could have that conflict. Yeah.
Now, can I come full circle? Because I thought after Charles was saying that we were going to have one map.
He was asking
that was going to be influenced by the character map. The character map was going to be used to help us do the land use. Now you're saying we might have two different maps. I thought they went.
They work together.
Yeah, I thought they work together.
Yes, they do.
Working together means you don't.
That's why I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
That's why I'm having a hard time of like what would be the scenario where we'd be at question, would one trump the other? And I'm just having a hard. They work together, and I don't see where they're.
Well, it's going to be like a million edges.
Yeah.
Somewhere where you know.
There might be, there could be an edge where we had a line where we said it was contemporary neighborhood and it's actually mid-century neighborhood. You know, there could be a line that was off a block, but you know.
Do we currently have a character map?
No.
Do you work on that?
So this would be a new process for.
But it is increasingly common for cities throughout the country, especially when you're going into a zoning update, because then again, you'll have regulations based on the character map that will influence the design of each area as well.
It's also much more common when you get to a city of this size. I mean, as you get to be a larger and larger city, doing a land use map that's parcel by parcel is,
Do I get it?
it's not.
I like the color blocking of the character map. I mean, that's, for my eyes and my brain, that's the simpleton here. You know, I do think that's an advantage. To understand what's different. It's easier to tell what changes.
You said a city of our size. We're the 40th largest city in the country, acre-wise.
I was thinking more of like on the population.
Okay.
But acreage size too is also, yeah.
We got a lot of land to plant. Not probably half of it's.
But I mean,
that's the east side.
all the land came from being annexed in the 60s to protect the watershed, and that's the main concern for a lot of residents here. And the feedback that we've consistently gotten from them, protect our water that supplies 65% of Norman. So, I mean, I think those were the conflicts that that you were talking about. So.
And I think that's, really what we spent some time on in June, in recognizing over and over and over that the overarching piece of all of this is protecting our lake, protecting our aquifer, so that we can deliver clean water to the people who live here. And, we talked then about making sure we have those policies also reflected. And, I don't think we're quite there yet in getting those written. But I think that was certainly a large part of what we talked about in June. That's driving all of this.
So I guess I'm gonna go back to my question that wasn't rhetorical. When do you consider these? Do you consider them together, or vote together, or do you vote for one and then the other? Now that I think maybe have a better understanding of them and how they are supposed to interact.
Would it be helpful to see them at the same time at least? At a minimum? Right? I don't know what the vote is, but at least.
What, Siobhan?
No, they were just asking if that's a city of Ormond question, but it's really a steering committee question.
Yeah.
I don't know that we could vote on it tonight.
No, not tonight. No, not tonight.
I was like, Beth is gonna go.
You will have a packet before next month's meeting that will have both of those in it, all the text and everything together, as close as we can get.
It would be really helpful to be able to see the land use map with everything that's already developed turned off. Nothing's gonna get rid of.
Yes, yeah, okay.
And
that's what we're basing the calculations on.
And there's no information that I've been able to find in any of the keys. One, it has no key, but the older key doesn't tell us density of
It has a.
TOD. I can't find it using this thing. There you go, okay. It doesn't tell us the density assumed in a transit-oriented development or in a urban
Yeah, we
town
had
center.
those, we had that back in the presentation. Yeah, sorry.
It's
I'm not
very hard
sorry.
to, I've got so many notes of everything we've done, and I know you're in it every day. It is very difficult to understand documents.
To that point, it'd also be nice to be able to overlay the character map on top of the land use map. Just shades of color, similar to the colors you have there. Not as the final product, but just to see if there's any of those things that are kind of odds, that they do truly follow each other. It's hard to do that when you're looking at two separate things. Some sort of overlay.
Yeah, there is a key here. It just, the older key tells us what they mean. This doesn't actually say how many units city occur. If you click on it, it tells things. You literally have neighborhoods I developed at 4 units the acre, and if you click on it, it's showing 6 to 12. Those inaccuracies freak me out a lot.
So I think the proposal to resolve that is to have the subsidy to kind of go through, you know, block by block, right? Yeah, okay. So Charles, since you raised up the thing about the character area map vis-a-vis the, I'm not trying to pronounce Bob, of course. But like, what is your thought about like how to vote on them?
I think they should be seen together, but they each get a vote.
Gotcha.
Because this is a policy map that hopefully will filter into the land use map, and the land use map is the density use part of it. My biggest concern is that the policy map will just get lost in plan somewhere, and the real policies will happen within the land use zoning code.
So maybe vote on them at the same night, the two separate votes. Is that what I hear you saying? Okay. Are people comfortable with that approach, what Charles is recommending?
They
Once
need
you work
to,
out,
they need to line up.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they need to match each other
Yeah.
and not have any contradictions.
Yeah.
Because one passes and then one doesn't. If that means you got a problem.
Correct?
Because they're not working together.
I would say that's correct. Yeah.
Right.
So it sounds to me like the sequence is the subcommittee gets together and identifies where the math isn't working out because like there's reality and maybe a mistake in the land use, right?
and that's the housing subcommittee. We're assuming that's the housing.
No.
It's
Yeah, it's a group, it'll be and I don't want to even call it a working group. I don't think we want to use the word
Oh,
subcommittee.
so sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I would highly suggest that we have a little bit of a working group that we'll pull together.
Richard can't be on that one. Just kidding.
So how will that working group, process, how will the working group be formed? I mean, do people volunteer for it tonight? Does city staff pick who they want? Like,
Yeah, I would assume it would come from the committee members here, so, yeah.
So should that working group be formed now, so
Sure.
that it can start working?
Yeah, I mean, we were going to reach out to Richard to ask him, because he had mentioned this on Monday when we chatted, and so I was like, why don't we just sit down and go through the whole map together? So if somebody else wants to join that conversation.
Okay, so who would like to be on the
can't
working
work
group with Richard to go really dive deep in terms of the block by block? Yeah, I mean, because of the center city, it seems like Lee would be the right one. Mitch would like to be involved as well. Siobhan, would you raise your hand?
I was pointing at Patrick.
Oh, Patrick?
Yeah.
So we have Patrick, Chuck, Mitch, Lee, Richard, anyone from the center? And Robert. Okay, what a great working group, good job.
He'll bring a couple of her on for 7 years.
Yeah.
I trust.
Okay.
Can I be an alternate?
Yeah, or you can actually be a full working
I was
group.
gonna say, what's our quorum?
Yeah.
Don't exceed it.
Public meetings, just like you said.
It's a working group, working group.
Great, great.
But they can do public meetings, just like the subcommittee meetings are.
Yeah.
Well,
In fact, I think
they will
that's-
be done as soon as we gotta get it done between now, and, I mean, we'll be here until next summer.
I think the results of the working group go to public meeting.
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
Definitely.
yeah.
Definitely. I think-
This is very in the weeds.
Yeah, I don't think you need to have public meeting when you put next to the law.
If Adair is available, I want him on there as well.
Yeah, I was actually
Downtown.
He knows this land as well as I do.
Okay,
Okay.
that's great. Do you want me to reach out to him or will you?
I'll take
Okay, are we? I think so. Does anyone else have anything else they want to say about these maps and the process that we're going to use to vote on the maps eventually? Anyone?
Would you say, I'm sorry?
I said, does anyone have anything else they want to say before we move on to the, well, I didn't say this, but before we move on to the subcommittee presentations?
So to Chuck's point, the map on the right's not going to float away and disappear. It's going to be, or excuse me, the map on the left, since that was the iteration that I think was amended to accommodate for certain comments or that kind of thing. So we're not going to lose the desire of those that came, however that map was developed based on previous comments. Now we've got this map on the right, I assume, because there's been no vote, there's been no discussion about why things changed formally. I assume that's not going away.
I mean, that'll be the vote, I guess. I mean,
That's still
I don't
discussions
delete anything, but, I mean,
Which map?
the one on the right will be the one that comes in your packet.
But we haven't,
And then you guys can have that discussion in
It's still
October.
a draft, right?
It's still a draft, yeah.
And
but the components though, of that map on the left was developed based on previous discussion and input. And so now we're just shucking that and going with the one on the right, which to Chuck's point, this committee never talked about.
So I think that from what Amanda said is that we'll get the feedback from the one-on-ones and all that, and then that would help support it, and then we can have the discussion again about where that
Yeah,
line
but
is.
let's be clear.
Jane has something to say, let's, Jane, go ahead.
Now about this, I just need to back up one step. Can I please have the names of those committee members that are going to, who was that?
Yeah, so it's Dan, Robert, Richard, Lee, Mitch, Chuck, and Patrick.
And Jim Adair.
And Jim. And Jim. He's available.
So one question.
So regarding what you just said, Scott, I mean, that map came due to an unfortunate misinterpretation that came out of the May meeting of what I had said. So what was assumed to be consensus was not. And in fact, there were some people that hadn't even talked about, like, moving anything east of 48. There were some groups that hadn't talked about following the natural ridge lines. Those voices were heard, and you know, I personally had a problem with that process happening that way. So So anyway.
So now we're assuming that consensus has been achieved on
No.
that one, right?
No, and I don't even know if consensus will ever be possible, quite frankly.
Sure.
Huh?
Because I remember discussion, for instance, on the Alameda tan area you see on the left, going over to Alameda and the Turnpike. I remember discussion on that. Now that's gone.
Yeah, but that's been confirmed that interchange is removed.
Yeah, by the OTA.
So that's why it's gone.
Yeah.
The OTA confirmed that interchange has been removed.
It's still on the
Yeah, we need to.
map.
It is, you're right. You're right.
But I mean, that's feedback from the other steering committees and the citizens. It's not, she was listening to everybody, not just a certain voice that pushed it east. She heard another voice that said, push it west.
All Scott's saying, can you just keep both maps alive?
Sure, yeah.
And circulating until we get to the bottom of this calculation in the map?
Do we want both of them in the next packet you get?
Yes.
And I don't disagree. We haven't had the discussion about what those changes actually are, and I don't disagree with having it. I mean, that jut out for the interchange at the Turnpike, that's one thing. I know why that looks different, but you're right, it's still on that, on the other, But the rest, I mean, we've not really had a conversation about.
So I think,
I don't have an issue
yeah,
with
I think
that
having both is great.
I don't think we want to continue.
Process question.
Processes.
How many options, if we're talking voting, how many options will we produce? Because, I mean, you are now there too. But if a lot of the feedback is some people don't want an inch move to the east, right? So what options, can we show options that are, well, this is, if we don't move east at all, we're going to really crank up our population density in the city. Can we produce those options to do due diligence to prove that this is an unrealistic option? Here's some other options. So that'd be a good idea.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? Does anybody, I kept going back to we walked out of the room with the understanding that there was, I don't know if consensus is the right word, that looking for a more natural boundary made sense to a lot of folks, rather than following some arbitrary street line.
That's my recollection. And your
Is that,
comment about.
yes, is that correct? Is
your
that
comment
not?
about the big dialogue I heard several people talk about was, well, if you have a section line road that has infrastructure and you only load one side of it, that does not seem to be a smart way to do that. But not talking about going very far, but using the infrastructure that's supported for 48th, for example. That dialogue happens several places about double loading 48th rather than just having a line that says it can only happen over here when you've got complementary. One side of the road's one house every 10 acres, the other side of the road is normal development standards. That just didn't make sense. And that dialogue was pretty broad.
So is that natural boundary? I'm not saying where it falls, just trying to find some sort of.
Amy, I would agree that both of these represent natural boundaries. Part of the problem is the way the sanitary sewer solution works. It's got nothing to do with either of these lines.
I would slightly disagree with that in the sense that we were trying to find it from the sense of some basins. So we're trying to follow, especially the one, we went back and double checked that, especially the one on the right, following the top of the ridge line, right? Because you're gonna be trying to capture at the bottom of each of those drainage areas and drain into that
I
central
understand
point.
this stuff backwards and forwards. It has more to do with everything flowing east. And the way these sewer systems are going to work, it really is going to be determined about where each of those lift stations get put in. And I would really like to get on talking about stormwater and wastewater, and we're just out of order. Like, we can talk about this because the point you just made, is why the 2017 map didn't get adopted. Nobody wants growth to happen east, and nobody wants growth to happen in town. We're tasked to try and resolve it, and we're not doing it because we have not spent any time working on the maps. And we've been asking for these maps, we've been asking to do this work for more than 6 months, and now we're going to do it.
That's not completely, I just like.
I stand behind what I just said.
Okay, but I'm just gonna push back a little bit, that's not completely fair. We have had the maps, we have the packet, we looked at it, and maybe we didn't, maybe not enough time
We
to
haven't
spend.
had any kind of like, show us the math of how this works.
That-
What is this?
Yes, I mean, I feel like with the land use map that we had a draft of, that we were supposed to comment on, that was at least a first draft. I mean, it can't all happen all at once, like it's a process. And so I feel like it's an unfair criticism of the consultants, that we haven't seen it at all. We have seen some version of it. Maybe it's not the final version, but we've seen some version of it. And we have to continue, and that's why we're having this conversation tonight.
And I will say that in the development of the map on the right, we looked at topo, we spent quite a bit of time talking with the wastewater team, the water team from the city and the consulting team to kind of just educate this as best as we can.
But I really appreciate your point about like moving on to the subcommittee presentation. I mean, do we feel like we're ready to move there? Yes? Everyone? Okay, great, awesome.
All right. I don't remember the order.
Yeah, who's up first?
It says water wastewater.
Water wastewater is first.
All right, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? I think the folks online can hear us as long as you can hear me all right. So, very good. My name is Cole Niblett. I lead our Oklahoma water team for Garver. Norman resident. I live out eastern Norman towards the lake. So, very excited to be part of this process and be talking with you here tonight. And so, as we've just discussed, the goal of today's meeting is to just give you an update of where we are at on the water wastewater side, what we've accomplished, what we've worked through. Okay, and so I want to give you a brief summary of our progress meetings to date, and then we'll talk through some wastewater concepts, water master plan concepts, and then move into next steps and schedule. All right. So everyone has seen this figure, and so just to reiterate how we develop our master plans, we really build this through specific tasks as we move through this process, and these tasks really build upon each other. And so the last time we talked to you about water and wastewater, we really focused on baseline development and existing system assessment tasks. And so over the last few months, we've really worked through all of those and are really rounding out our alternatives evaluation at this point and starting to develop plans for both our water and wastewater infrastructure. And so ultimately, our master plans will have a lot of fancy graphs and nice engineering calculations, but at the end of the day, what we're going for is a list of projects, a set of CIPs, capital improvement plans, that Chris Mackin and his staff can use to meet the needs of Norman residents over the next 20 years. And so ultimately, that's what we're working towards. Our subcommittee has met with several regional stakeholders to better inform some of our key decisions. And so I think these have been really instrumental in our process, really eye-opening for a lot of our subcommittee staff and the folks on that committee. ACOG, we met with the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, John Harrington, who manages the groundwater model for that association, came out and spoke to us about his efforts in tracking the Garver One aquifer, some of the dynamics he's seen there. That was a great conversation. We met with the Oklahoma Water Resources Board to talk about water rights, particularly as it relates to augmenting Lake Thunderbird and how that would look from a water rights perspective. We met with Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust as it relates to purchasing water from OKC as part of our water supply portfolio. Had a really productive meeting with them. And then finally, the subcommittee met with and toured the CMCD facilities with Kyle Arthur, got to see some of that infrastructure on how we pump from the lake, supply our water treatment plant, and got a lot of good information from that meeting as well.
And Kyle is on our committee as well, too.
Yeah, Kyle Arthur is on our steering committee or subcommittee, yes, sir. All right. And so we've had 4 primary workshops over the last several months, in addition to some of those standalone meetings as well. And so really, we dove into a lot of alternatives evaluation in our August workshop. And so really, our next few meetings are going to round out that alternatives evaluation and really sit down and focus on those capital improvement plans moving forward. So before I dive in and start throwing a lot of engineering acronyms and things at you and start showing graphs, I want to just establish a few key water and wastewater terms. And so when we look at our alternatives evaluation, a lot of the time, what we're focusing on is a capacity gap. How do we supply capacity gaps with our infrastructure on both the water and wastewater? So a lot of the time, what you'll hear us talk about is average future demand or max day demand, peak hour demand, most of the time in 1 million gallons per day. And so at the crux of our evaluation, it's really driven by population projections and the average per capita demand that our citizens use on an average basis throughout the system. And so very simple calculations at the heart of a lot of our evaluations. So we look at that projected population over that planning horizon. We look at per capita demands throughout the system. We evaluate historical data, apply those factors to give us that future average demand. Just for context, the average Norman resident, based on our historical data, uses about 136 gallons per day per capita. Similarly, when we look at max day demands or peak hour demands, we're taking that average future demand and we're applying various peaking factors to account for those max day events where everyone is irrigating their lawns, filling their pools, hot weather events, where we get those max future demands that we have to account for as well. And that plays into our infrastructure in a few key ways. And so I wanted to introduce those 2 terms because those end up getting used a lot and for different purposes, but ultimately that average day demand, that's what we typically use to size or evaluate things like water rates. Things that are more long-term, 25, 50-year demands that we need to plan for. Whereas that max day demand, that is more important for sizing actual infrastructure. So lift stations out in the wastewater collection system, those have to be able to handle those max day events. So we size those things accordingly. So that's why you see those 2 terms used. So moving from overall demands, talking about the water distribution system. So we've brought in the water supply, we're now delivering it to end users. And so a few key terms that you'll see in our master plan that we discuss ad nauseum: service pressure in pounds per square inch. Obviously, when we take a shower at night and we irrigate our lawns, we want a healthy service pressure to make sure we're able to meet those domestic demands. Available fire flows, we want to make sure that the system can deliver fire flow, adequate fire flows to account for those events when we have those situations out in the system. And then we look at pipeline velocity, the actual velocity of that water moving through that pipeline to control that infrastructure, or control that velocity so that we have safe infrastructure that's viable over the long term. Largely, as far as Norman's distribution system today, service pressures, fire flows are in really good shape throughout the system. And so right now there aren't a lot of capacity gaps from this perspective that we're working on. Really, as we grow into new areas and densify certain areas, that's where a lot of our alternatives evaluation will be focused on. Similarly, on the wastewater collection side, we look at something like what you see on the screen, which is kind of a conceptual rendering of what our collection system looks like. So we have a series of gravity mains throughout the system that are collecting those wastewater demands to central locations to ultimately be treated, reclaimed, and then discharged to a receiving stream. And so we look at things like what you see here, where we've got the gravity sewer that's actually carrying that wastewater. But we have manholes throughout the system that we also track modeled surcharge height to ultimately prevent surcharging overflows in that collection system. That's kind of our controlling factor that we're evaluating. And so as we grow the collection system, as we plan that infrastructure, largely we are looking at controlling those surcharge events, those max flow events in the sewer system. One thing you'll also hear later on in this presentation, and certainly in the master plans evaluated, is potable reuse as a potential water supply. This has been studied pretty extensively for the city of Norman. Potable reuse happens quite regularly throughout our country. And so what this involves is reclaiming wastewater, treating that through advanced treatment processes to a very high level, a potable level, that we can then reuse that reclaimed wastewater for drinking water purposes. And so when we talk about indirect potable reuse, or IPR, that's what's been studied and discussed the most in the context of Norman. And so what that looks like is taking discharge from the water reclamation facility, treating that through an advanced treatment system, bringing that to potable water quality, and then discharging that into a reservoir or some sort of environmental buffer. In our case, that would be Lake Thunderbird, augmenting Lake Thunderbird with highly treated reclaimed wastewater. From that point, it can be withdrawn from that reservoir and then sent back to the water treatment plant to be treated again before it goes to the end users. You'll also hear us discuss direct potable reuse, or DPR. So this is a modification to what you just saw. In this, or in DPR systems, which are also present in our country, this system essentially bypasses that environmental buffer. So instead of discharging to a reservoir, for example, there would be more engineered barriers, engineered buffer in that system, and essentially bypassing that step where we go from an advanced treatment facility directly back to the water treatment plant before going to end users. All right. So that establishes some of the major terms and factors that we're looking at in these master plans. And so first I want to start with some of the wastewater concepts and some of the major findings we've found thus far in our efforts. And so when we look at the ultimate 20-year demand that we're looking to plan for, our future annual average day of wastewater that we're projecting in the system is just under 18 MGD, million gallons per day. And that includes a 10% reserve capacity. And so to orient you to the graph on the screen, that left vertical axis is that wastewater flow in million gallons per day. We have a timeline, a 20-year planning horizon roughly across that horizontal axis. And then we're also showing you the service population just for context. To show you that really, our wastewater demands really follow that projection curve. And you'll note that our service population at the 2045 mark, that's somewhere around the 160,000 capita mark. And you may think, well, the total population in Norman is 180 plus. That is that delta essentially is the amount of residents that would not be serviced on the city sewer system. Those would be systems that are serviced by local septic systems for those users that aren't on the city system. Just for context, our current water reclamation facility is sized for roughly 17 MGD. So this is not an overly significant increase over the 20-year planning horizon, and this is largely in line with what the previous plan projected as well. And so you all started talking about this just a few minutes earlier, but as we look at the collection system, largely what our effort will be focused on is optimizing the sewer sheds across those ridge lines throughout the system as we grow into new areas. And so showing you a map of Norman here, it's a bold black line through the middle of Norman. That's a primary ridge line that runs through the center of our community. And so largely everything on the south side of that line flows to the Canadian River. Everything north of that flows into one of the major tributaries shown there, Little River, Rock Creek, David Blue Creek. And so, as was pointed out earlier, those sewer sheds, or those watersheds rather, flow generally east towards the lake. And so, while everything south of that black line is already generally flowing south, the other side of that sewer shed flowing the opposite way, that's a large effort to plan, optimize those sewer sheds to capture those flows in regional areas, regional lift stations, and consolidate those back to various treatment locations, or a singular treatment location. You'll note the orange boxes are the lift stations that we have in place currently today. And so you can generally see where those lift stations are and where future lift stations might be needed as we continue to look at some of those more northern and eastern areas. One evaluation that is tied to this, many of you will have been a part of the discussions on, do we need a second water reclamation facility, or do we build out our existing work? WRF, sometimes referred to as work. And so that's a major part of our evaluation, and we've spent a lot of time talking about this with our subcommittee. And so you can see we've evaluated a few different areas. Starting at the north, that small red dot is a previous location that was master planned as a future North WRF. That's been included in our evaluation. And we've also looked at a few potential other sites further to the northeast. You can see that large red circle. And then also considering a southeast WRF. We went through a pretty extensive evaluation looking at the conveyance needs to consolidate all the flows in these various locations. Had a lot of really good discussion. You can see that would generally look like roughly 11 million gallons per day coming to the existing WRF, roughly 7 MGD going to the north or east wharf. And so we understand what this looks like, and one thing that is still being penciled out to the final details, but one thing that's appearing in our efforts is that the existing wharf, because it's been master planned for both expansion and future reuse opportunities, local reuse opportunities, it's likely going to be the most cost-effective alternative over the next 20 years. There's potential benefits with the north or east wharf, but largely the financial pressures associated with building a new plant will likely make the existing wharf a more attractive alternative in 20 years. And as such, a lot of our capital improvements plan will be focused on consolidating in those collection systems to ultimately convey back to the existing wharf. So I'm going to switch gears right now and kind of turn into water supply alternatives. And so similar to the demand graph that we showed you for wastewater, our water supply projections show a 2045 capacity gap of roughly 12 million gallons per day. Now that includes a 10% reserve capacity. I glazed over that a bit slides ago, but that reserve capacity is something we build into our projections to account for things like major industrial users coming overnight that introduce a lot of demand to the system. While we don't necessarily project that to happen or know of that being a possibility, we want to build in some contingencies into our plans to make sure that we're conservative in our sizing and projections. And so you can see roughly, looking at a similar demand graph here, about that 2045 mark, 20 years out, we're roughly at 25 MGD total average day capacity, again including that 10% reserve. And so a lot of our discussions over the last couple of meetings have really been focused on, okay, how do we meet that supply gap? And so if you've read the previous water supply plan, it was completed back around 2012. That plan evaluated a number of different water supply alternatives, and we've carried those forward to update the costs associated with those. So you can see on the screen, the top 3 are the water supply portfolios that were adopted in that last master plan, maintaining treated water purchase from Oklahoma City, that's happening today. Garber-Wellington wells, continuing to expand the well field that the city is currently using today. And then Lake Thunderbird augmentation, that IPR system that we talked about. Further down, you can see the other alternatives that we've brought back to our evaluation, just to be comprehensive. You can see DPR, Scissortail, and Parker reservoirs would actually involve building new reservoirs out of basin down towards Ada. Those were a lot of discussions that happened several years ago, maybe partnering with other municipalities to build a new reservoir dedicated for water supply to the city of Norman. Stormwater capture, there was conceptual ideas of capturing stormwater throughout the city of Norman, conveying that to a central location, reusing that as a water supply. And then finally, a new in-basin reservoir, building a reservoir closer to Norman, dedicated solely to this municipality. And then finally, developing a new alluvium well field in the Canadian River alluvial aquifer. So that would be another groundwater supply that isn't tied to the Garber-Wellington aquifer. And so for the purposes of this conversation, and to make sure Alan has time to talk through stormwater, we really want to focus on what we're seeing as the short-listed and more viable alternatives. So a lot of the alternatives that are grayed back now, we talked through those in our last subcommittee meeting. Most of these are simply cost prohibitive. When you look at the pros and cons and the financial investment needed to make those things happen, it just doesn't pencil out from a financial perspective. And so largely our conversations are focusing on expanding that treated water OKC supply and then the other alternatives you see on the screen. And so I want to talk through these in just a bit more detail. Starting with OKC treated water purchase. And so this alternative was discussed heavily during the last master plan, and one of the major considerations for this alternative is that would be Norman purchasing water from another utility. So the water rates are subject to increase, just like any other municipality purchasing treated wholesale water. And so that's a big consideration here. And so showing you a graph of a tentative OKC water rate projection over the next 20 years. OKC recently completed a financial rate study of their system, and so we're hoping to get some more detailed information from them in the coming days. But just to give you some perspective, showing, again, orienting to this graph, the vertical axis is our dollar per thousand, what we would be paying to purchase per 1,000 gallons from OKC. And you can see when we apply various growth rates to those rates. We presented a sensitivity analysis just to give you some context. That middle orange line, 5% escalation per year, that's typically what we've seen from the OKC rates. They're published in their municipal code, you can go see those, and that's typically what that annual escalation rate has been. However, there are some years that's 7, 8, maybe more, depending on growth in their system and how they push those costs to wholesale users. And so you can see over the 20-year horizon, starting around $260 per thousand gallon here in 2024. Over the 20-year planning horizon, that 5% escalation gets us to roughly $6 per thousand. You can see the difference in those different rates. So that unknown projection it's a consideration for this water supply. From an infrastructure perspective, it's very straightforward. We already have a connection with the city of Oklahoma City. We have residual capacity in that connection. Once we get over a certain threshold, we would need to construct a second OKC connection. But again, that involves a relatively simple infrastructure project as compared to going and building a new lake, 30, 40 miles away from home. Garber-Wellington wells, I believe most of the folks that have looked at that previous master plan will be familiar with this, but Norman currently has a well field in eastern Norman that are plumbed to convey that water from those wells into the distribution system. There are currently plans in place to centralize all of that flow through a groundwater treatment facility to both chlorinate and also provide future treatment for things like arsenic and chromium, depending on regulatory conditions in the future. And so this alternative would include continuing to expand that well field as the city has done over the last 10, 15 years or so, and continuing to expand that groundwater capacity. Just a quick look at IPR, what that might look like in our existing water reclamation facility. This has been studied. There's been multiple engineering reports and studies conducted on this. The city of Norman conducted a roughly 15-month pilot over this as well. And so essentially what this would look like is building an advanced water treatment facility at the existing WRF. And so you can see the color-shaded facilities there and what that would look like as far as additional infrastructure at this facility. And then, of course, a conveyance line from the existing WRF into Dave Creek or some other similar location to augment Lake Thunderbird. Looking at DPR, it would look very similar from a treatment perspective with, again, some additional engineered barriers at the existing WRF. But instead of pumping to Lake Thunderbird, to Dave Creek, we would take that effluent and direct that directly to the water treatment plant off Robinson to utilize as additional water supply from that source. And then finally, context on the Canadian River alluvium well field. Shown in gray, or shown in tan rather, in this graph is the Canadian River alluvial aquifer. You can see it kind of borders that southwestern band along Norman there. And so this would involve building a new well field in West Norman. There are a lot of challenges with this aquifer, or can be potential challenges with this aquifer, both finding the yields we need in those wells and the potential water quality we may get from this aquifer may be more challenging, or likely will be more challenging as compared to the Garber-Wellington. And so you can see that looks like a similar well field in West Norman, a centralized water treatment plant before utilizing that and conveying that to the distribution system. And so jumping into some costs, just to give you some rough context, or at least give you a preview of how this is shaking out. We've developed 20-year life cycle costs for these shortlisted alternatives that we're talking about here today. And so you can see the various alternatives that we just talked through and their overall dollar per thousand gallons over a 20-year horizon. So the average dollar per thousand when we consider capital costs, ongoing O&M over a 20-year life cycle for that infrastructure. And so we talked about that OKC wholesale connection. You can see roughly at $2.60, just under $3 per thousand gallons. That really looks attractive from a dollar per thousand gallons perspective. Again, hoping to get more detail from them on what sort of projections we might expect and if they have the residual capacity to fully commit to providing the capacity we would need from that connection. Moving to the right, Garber-Wellington, right around that $5 per thousand gallon capacity, just under that. Groundwater typically is much more cost effective as it compares to surface water treatment, less treatment infrastructure needed, you drill a well, even if you have arsenic or something like that, the treatment is typically more cost effective than a full surface water treatment plant. And so that cost is correspondingly lower. And then following to the right, you can see the different reuse scenarios with existing WRF and indirect potable reuse coming in the middle bar there. And then just for context, if we looked at constructing a new water reclamation facility, IPR still correspondingly above the costs to the left there. And then if we look at DPR, the additional treatment, the additional engineered barriers there does add a significant cost, and so you'll see that coming in just over that $10 per 1,000 gallon. And so to wrap it up here, just a quick sneak peek on how our subcommittee is going to evaluate some of these alternatives and give their ultimate recommendations. We are now working through a non-monetary evaluation of these various water supply alternatives. So we're looking at the financial cost. Obviously, financial pressures is a constraint that we have to live with, but we also want to consider the non-monetary pros and cons of each alternative. And so looking at things like environmental impacts, implementability, how implementable is this system? Can we readily construct and receive water from this supply over a reasonable timeline? Public acceptance. How acceptable will this be to the ratepayers of Norman? Reliability, redundancy, and then of course drought resiliency. We all remember the drought stages of 2010, 2011, and the conditions that presented at Lake Thunderbird. And so having a water supply that gives us some drought resiliency, some drought proofing, so to speak, in our water portfolio is something we want to consider. And so we set up various scoring matrix for all those criteria. And ultimately what we're wanting to get to is to be able to plot these non-monetary scores against those costs for the various alternatives to really develop a heat map that gives us a nice visual representation of where we're thinking these optimal alternatives lay out. So to give you an example, this is not what the subcommittee has produced. This is an example from another project, but what we're ultimately trying to get to is a graph like you see here where we have cost on the vertical axis, that non-monetary score on the horizontal axis, and all our various water supply alternatives plotted therein. And so obviously we want as high a non-monetary score as we can. We want those non-monetary benefits and pros, and we want an optimal cost. So we really want to be in that green far right lower zone, so to speak, to really justify those water supply alternatives. And so we're working through that exercise. We've gone through one round of scoring with our committee, and we'll be finalizing that over our next meeting or so to ultimately land on a evaluation similar to this to bring a recommendation from the subcommittee. And so that's really all I have for tonight. We will have, I do have a brief schedule here, but we have September 20th subcommittee meeting where we'll,
No, when you're done, I just have a question.
This is it. We've got a big meeting on September 20th. We're going to round out a lot of alternatives evaluation. And then by our October 11th meeting, we really want to be focusing on capital improvement plans, things like that, so we can wrap up towards the end of the year.
You had a really neat map showing water pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And then you started talking about surcharge. Do you have a corresponding map that shows, and can you get it to us? Because as we talk about putting development pressure back into downtown, and there's a group of us right now working on what is the existing infrastructure downtown, we don't have the capacity to put out a fire and support fire suppression systems in urban buildings downtown. We certainly don't have stormwater down there and stormwater capacity, and we absolutely don't have any detention down there to deal with increasing densification of the urban core. I don't know what the condition of the sanitary sewer is, so having a corresponding map like that would be really valuable to everybody in this room.
Yeah, absolutely. So this graph came from running the hydraulic model for the distribution system. We maintain a very similar hydraulic model for the collection system. And so there's a corresponding set of graphs for the collection system. Right.
Great. My other question is, how are we doing compared to other central Oklahoma cities, given that our climate is comparable to Bethany or Edmond, or I know there's microclimates, but our 136 gallons per day per capita, that's our base water usage. That's not our peak irrigation usage. How are we doing on both of them? And you have a map that shows our peak usage. Because we have a policy here that we charge you a lot more once you start using a whole lot of water during peak demand times. So large lots, big houses, it's well known that they use a lot of those water resources. I've asked you a lot of questions there. Can you pick them apart and tell me what you know?
Yes, sir. So I'll try to work from the beginning. So your question on gallons per capita per day, that per capita consumption, Norman's very comparable for other municipalities in our region. To give you some context, DEQ actually won't let you plan for anything less than 100 gallons per capita per day without serious justification. And so that's kind of considered the baseline for most communities in our state and our region.
So it'll start smelling bad or something, right?
What's that?
We'd start smelling bad.
Right, that's right. And so as far as max day peaking factors and water loss throughout the system, we had a good discussion with Nathan and the staff on that. Again, Norman's in a pretty good spot.
But is there a heat map that shows that, how max water usage?
Yeah, so what you'll see, and we've developed some technical memos, and so this graph here shows pressures in the system under average day conditions today.
Yeah.
We developed a whole host of maps that shows what does the system look like in 20 years under max day with various improvements. So there's a whole host of maps that show the max day scenarios for that.
Okay, those would be great to be able to see as well. We're thinking about the environmental resource demands that a dense urban thing does, or a medium dense urban thing, or the false dichotomy that large lots are somehow, good for the environment. They're not. They use a ton of resources and pollute a ton. So being able to see that as we drive into the detail of housing policy and development policy would be useful to all of us.
I think you had one more question, and I forgot.
I think it's sort of, I was hoping we were better than it, and then you would be able to tell us.
I don't have Edmund's data, so I can't stand before I say that.
Find it out sometime.
Dan, any comments as the subcommittee chair, anything I glazed over?
No, I think you covered everything pretty well. We're still trying to figure a way for the IPR to work. Everybody seems to look. We've got to figure out that puzzle of what to do with the water. Make it happen, make everything.
Yes, sir.
Do you include any uncertainties in the models with changes in future climate, future drought? Like again, 10 more of those 2011s happening over the next 2045. Do you include that at all?
Yeah, so largely where we account for that, we talk about these reserve capacities and the peaking factors. So this is for wastewater. Let me go to water supply. That's one of the things that reserve capacity is intended to account for. And so as it relates to drought resiliency with Thunderbird, there's actually a really cool modeling effort that we were actually talking about you having some really good input on that as a climatologist. This is a separate slideshow, separate discussion, but we modeled how Lake Thunderbird, how much would we actually have to augment Lake Thunderbird to keep it at acceptable or preferable levels. And so we've taken historical climate data and modeled that. And so projecting future climate changes is something we're very interested in including in that. So there may be a slide deck that I need to send you to get your input on that.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
And I have a question. How are all the personal wells that are out there in East Norman? How is that balanced out using the city wells to make sure that the personal wells don't at some point lose pressure or run dry? How's that factored in?
Yeah, and Chris has some good content on this, but largely that falls on the OWRB. There are regulations that they enforce on well spacing, how you construct that well to control your zone of influence in the aquifer. And OWRB has some monitoring wells in East Norman to track how the municipal wells, comparing their operation to what's being recorded in the aquifer. I think, Chris, so far the data's been really encouraging that pumping at the lower levels where the municipal wells are really has had pretty negligent effects on the shallower water tables.
That's correct, yeah. It's a lot of the domestic wells out there are 0 to 200, maybe 300 feet deep, and we don't perf or compete against those zones of water. We go past 300 and we don't start screening or perfing until 400 to 600.
I know one factor in the 2060 water plan was augmented Lake Thunderbird is great, but we don't get all of it because we share with the city and the city. So, you know, us putting money we put in there that we overuse it, we get charged or we're limited. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, how does that factor in? I mean,
Well, that was part of the,
that's all part of the
that was part of the
discussion.
discussion with
Yeah.
OWRB, like whose water is it if it goes back into the bowl?
yeah.
Probably, I mean, this hasn't been done before in Oklahoma, so it's all figuring it out, right? And the water rights, the cities don't hold the water rights, the COMCD holds the water rights. Cities get a certain percentage of the water rights. Probably until you get back to, you know, kind of what was inferred in that meeting, I'll say, not set in stone, but until you get the lake back to its yield of 21.68 feet, it's still everybody's water. If you get above that, then maybe it's all Norman's water. But you know, I think I've been very open. We still have 2 cities that are not sold on augmenting the lake, and it's not just Norman's Lake. So there are regulatory and political hurdles still to be had that have been in place for a long time. It's just, and I'm not sure in the end it provides Norman all of the water that it needs anyway. So.
And how we're viewing that in our plan is that there's a lot of potential benefits to reuse. It's potentially fairly cost effective compared to other alternatives, but we have to be realistic about the timing and how implementable that is. So our plan will have to account for that. How can we meet demands in the next 5 years? You know, things we need now, essentially, compared to the timelines that we think IPR can be potentially implemented on.
It certainly helps with drought, though. It absolutely helps with that.
It seemed like the Oklahoma City option is a little more viable than maybe we thought in the past.
Dan and the subcommittee, we were very pleasantly surprised from that meeting and some of the discussions that were had. And I think that was really
And we specifically asked the question that everybody wants to hear, is Oklahoma City going to shut off our water? They all looked around and resoundingly said there's no chance of that. Everybody that we supply as a wholesale will fall under the same rules. And we expect all the users to follow our drought requirements. And currently Norman's is even heavier than what Oklahoma City is. So, you know, my comment to them is your name's all wrong. From Oklahoma City Water Department, you should be regional or central Oklahoma Water Department. They're existing, so they supply what, Yukon, there's a number of cities. Yeah, a number of metro areas they serve around here, and then also on the way up from the lakes in southeast Oklahoma. They're a water factory. They've got product, they want to sell it to us. If we have, as our demand grows, they'd like to hear our plans because they have growth plans too with Draper and other lakes. We can be part of that growth. So it was a really positive meeting. I mean, I had concerns too and left with that feeling that this is a real viable, cost-effective solution for us. Part about us, you know, one of the questions we have in there, and everybody's asking this, is, hey, we're buying the water from somebody else, and we don't own that. So I think that's going to be really the biggest hurdle of that solution. As Colt presented, we have an existing pipeline, a new pipeline would come straight down from Draper over to the northeast side of Norman, serving that area water treatment. So that's a real positive, viable option for the city.
Okay, Alan, I think you're up.
Hey, Amy, can I jump in and give the transportation update real quick?
Yeah, I think we were just looking at the time here and having a little bit of a chat too, and just seeing how much we want to kind of even push to next month. So, because we have to be out of here at 8 o'clock, so. Did you guys?
Okay, I will jump off. I sent you an email.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, Alan, that's your call. You're giving the presentation, so we have to be out at 8. It's 7:23.
We got it under 30 minutes, so y'all give us 7 minutes to spare.
Yeah, on the caveat that if there's more questions, we can come back next month and address those.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's, you're good. Yes, I think so too.
I mean, I hate to cut off questions.
Yeah, agreed.
Good discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk fast,
Hopefully I will speed through this pretty good. I do want to caveat, we are going to talk about some preliminary recommendations today. And these are things that have been discussed with some of our subcommittee members and micro committees, but nothing is final. We're going to be discussing these in detail in our October 15th meeting, coming out with some good solid recommendations for stormwater moving forward in Norman. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of our group here, these names up here on the screen are our subcommittee. You've probably seen these all already. I'm going to skip through that a little bit, but of course I do want to mention Amanda Nairn has been our subcommittee chair, and she's been excellent at moving us forward with this process. So here's our agenda. I'm not going to dwell on that very long either, in the interest of time. So similar to what Cole said, we are in the evaluating alternatives and plan development stage of this process. We are looking at potential recommendations to make for stormwater. And I do want to just kind of paint a picture of how this relates to the other plans as well. So with land use and housing, impervious area, as it densifies in the urban core of Norman, the Norman core area, that's going to create some stormwater issues as we send density and impervious area out into the Lake Thunderbird watershed. That also creates issues. We'll talk about that as well, but that's how those two plans kind of work into stormwater. Water and wastewater, we just talked about a lot of issues with stormwater quality, potential reuses of stormwater, things like that. That's the things that have been discussed as well. Transportation obviously has a lot of intersection with stormwater infrastructure. That is something that we are looking into to make sure that our stormwater proposed projects align with the transportation proposed projects as well. And with parks, a lot of this open space that's available is adjacent to riparian areas. We want to make sure that that riparian area, if it's a park that is used well, used for stormwater's beneficial use. So to get an overview of what stormwater is, I would highly recommend you guys go to the City of Norman website. There's a stormwater page. It's got two really great, interesting videos. I'm not going to play those today, but those are really explain what stormwater is. I'm going to try to paint a picture of what stormwater is in Norman. What does stormwater mean for Norman? The most important thing for you guys to understand in Norman, that you probably already know, is that we have a major ridge line going through kind of northwest to southeast through Norman that divides the Lake Thunderbird watershed from the Canadian River watershed. And there's pretty significant differences in the issues facing stormwater for those two watersheds. In the Canadian River watershed, flood mitigation and maintenance of built stormwater infrastructure is a big deal. And then in the Lake Thunderbird watershed, the water quality preservation and the maintenance of those existing stormwater conveyance streams is the biggest issue. So that divide between the Canadian River watershed and the Lake Thunderbird watershed is very important to understand about the picture of stormwater facing. Here's a picture of our floodplain maps, the FEMA regulated floodplain maps. The purple area is the regulated regulatory floodway that has a little bit of different ordinances that apply to that than the approximate Zone A floodplains that are in predominantly in the Lake Thunderbird watershed. A lot of people often think that stormwater is just the bridges that convey the storm. This is a bridge. It's actually a large culvert right around the corner from my house. That's my 3-year-old playing around in the apron there. But I do want to point out that this is it's the Imhoff Road Bridge over Imhoff Creek. This was a place where the retaining wall, the wing wall of that culvert actually collapsed and started to collapse and caused a really major burden on the stormwater funding for the city. And that kind of thing can be mitigated through maintenance, inspection, constant understanding of what our stormwater picture is. That maintenance can really help prevent issues like that cause a major burden on the city. Another thing that we think about with stormwater is detention ponds. This is right outside of City Hall. I went out and took this picture in August when it was raining about 6 inches in 6 hours. So, this is a stormwater BMP. It's a detention pond that was at its max capacity. We also have to consider stormwater quality. This is a picture from the same day where we have a lot of sediment that's stirred up, being washed downstream. You can see that water really churning in that one specific location, ripping that sediment out of the ground and sending it downstream. And so we have to understand what happens to that sediment as it moves further downstream and try to prevent that as much as possible. Another major aspect of stormwater is the stormwater quality as it applies to things that are entering the system as pollutants. So you can sort of see in that picture the trash that's accumulated on the stem walls of that culvert there, and just a major amount of trash entering our urban streams in Norman. But we also have to keep in mind the phosphorus and nitrogen, the nutrients that are entering the streams, not only in the urban area, but also as we move development further east. So helping to prevent that is a major aspect of the stormwater picture in Norman. So we kind of talked about those two that divide the major issues facing each watershed, the Canadian River watershed having the mitigation and maintenance issues, and then the Little River watershed, or the Lake Thunderbird watershed, having that preservation, water quality preservation and maintenance. The thing that ties those two together is maintenance and understanding, constant vigilance, constant understanding of our stormwater picture in Norman, and of course that leads to the big deal is that we don't have enough funding to fund the maintenance that's required for maintaining our stormwater systems and the stormwater quality. So one of our biggest recommendations that we propose at this point is to continue the conversation with stormwater utility. That's been something that's been discussed quite a bit in Norman, and we'll get to that a little bit more later in the presentation. So looking at the 2009 Stormwater Master Plan, these were the stated goals. They basically boil down to the guarding the citizens from flood dangers and also protecting our water quality. And so if you guys have not seen, like Amanda mentioned, the Stormwater Master Plan is a beautiful document. It's very comprehensive and it's huge. And it really paints a great picture of the stormwater issues facing Norman. We're not really trying to change that. We're not going to try to rebuild this piano. We're just going to tune it. We're going to try to take the things that were good about that plan and continue them, kind of understand how they apply to today, maybe change the methodology of some of the science that went into the calculations. But really, we're taking the same things that were applicable in 2009 and bringing them to today. So I'm going to try to talk about some of those key aspects that were introduced in 2009 that have been implemented already. One of those was string planting corridors in the Lake Thunderbird watershed. So the Lake Thunderbird watershed, there was a pretty innovative methodology applied to these drainage ways in Lake Thunderbird watershed, and these storm planting corridors were delineated for everything that had a 40 acres or larger drainage area contributed to. And so these are a GIS layer at this point. That's really all they are until something is platted, until a property is platted, and at that point, the stream planting corridor that was delineated in 2009 becomes what's called the water quality protection zone. And there are certain regulations that go into what you can and cannot do in the water quality protection zone, how wide that should be based on different stormwater sustainability practices, BMPs that are applied in those WQPZ areas. But it's important to note that the stream planting corridors, not everything that is delineated as a stream planting corridor is a WQPZ. That process happens when you go through the planning process. It becomes a WQPZ at that point. I'm going to show a picture of all of the capital projects that were identified in 2009 in a few minutes, but I do want to highlight that even without the stormwater utility fee, there's been some good progress and some projects that have been initiated and completed since 2009 through the general fund, through even the stormwater team going out and getting grants. So there's been a lot of good projects that have been completed, and these stars represent those project locations. Another thing that's been done that's been really needed and critical is updating the engineering design criteria. So walking through the different sections of the engineering design criteria, we have section 5,000, which is drainage design criteria. So whenever a development goes in and they're designing the roadways, designing detention ponds, designing a bridge over a major drainage way, these engineering design criteria have been updated with more modern science than what was in there before. It's NOAA's Atlas 14 precipitation estimates, providing freeboard for the 100-year flow for new bridges, which is really pretty great. I mean, it allows that major floodplain area pretty much to be left relatively untouched. And then also providing a system for regularly scheduled, looking back at this engineering design criteria and updating it based on modern science. And so that's really critical. And then section 6000 is our stormwater quality design criteria. And so some of this more point source stormwater quality issues are addressed in section 6000. Construction sites, for example, the design criteria for those construction sites and the erosion control in those locations is in this section. One of the new things, one of the more innovative things in this update was section 7000, and that's our sustainable stormwater design criteria. Now, it's important to note that the sustainable stormwater design, these LID design criteria are encouraged, and they are optional. They're not mandatory by any ordinance at this point. So that, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the future, but that's one of the things that we think is a major step up, that we can take a major step up in controlling some of the stormwater quality issues as we potentially develop further east. And protecting those natural streams is making some of these LID, sustainable stormwater design, actually something that's mandatory. So I'm going to not dwell on these too much, but there have been several studies that have happened since 2009 regarding stormwater quality, specifically in the Norman area. So in 2016, there was a TMDL issued for the Lake Thunderbird watershed, so total maximum daily load, which sets limits on how much pollutants can go into the watershed based on DEQ standards. And so there was a compliance and monitoring plan that was initiated in 2016 to make sure that we have a plan, that we have outlined steps that are structural and non-structural to meet this TMDL requirement. And then 2024, the stormwater management plan, which is confusing, it has the same initials as our stormwater master plan, but the stormwater management plan also provides a step-by-step process for meeting our OKRO4, MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit requirements. So that's a lot of words, but just it has to do with stormwater quality and meeting those criteria. Also, we do an annual report. Michelle's group does an annual report for our MS4 program every year, showing how we're meeting that plan that I just talked about. There's also the Mayor's Climate Agreement recommendations that have been, there's been recommendations made in 2023 to meet that Mayor's Climate Agreement that was initiated back even before the Stormwater Master Plan of 2009. There's also been watershed-based plans that look at some of those contributing water quality issues to Lake Thunderbird. That one was actually done in 2008, right before the Stormwater Master Plan, but also the Bishop Creek watershed and Canadian River, and the Canadian River watershed side of the city. And so those are really great studies that kind of outline some of the stormwater quality issues facing Norman. So I'm going to hop into reemphasizing some of those projects and policies that were recommended in 2009 but not yet implemented. So this is a picture showing all of the capital projects that were recommended as part of this 2009 plan. And you can kind of see where those projects, these are the same stars that we had on the last plan, or on the last slide. And you can see the gaps. There's a lot of projects that are left to do from that 2009 plan. And obviously the gap there is funding. We have to have funding either through a stormwater bond or through the general fund to address some of the stormwater issues. One thing that was mentioned in 2009 is what's called a water quality volume. So in 2009, this was called a capture and treatment volume, but essentially, if you think of most rainfall events that happen throughout the year are 1 inch or less. And so the capture and treatment volume, the water quality volume, is a design criteria that would require a development or I guess development is the right word, that would require a development to capture and treat that first flush, is what we call it, that first flush of rainwater, as it leaves the property, as it leaves the development area. And that would make a huge difference in the water quality moving downstream into the watersheds. That was introduced in 2009 through the discussion of the streamlined corridors. It was also put into section 7000 of the engineering design criteria, but it is not yet mandatory. So that's something that we think can be moved forward. And we also want to identify some of those missing items that need to be included moving forward that were not necessarily mentioned in detail in 2009. So one of those is a stormwater inventory that's been discussed. We need to know about our built stormwater infrastructure, what condition it's in, where it even is, how do we put those lines that we have in our map how do we put those together? What size are they? What condition are they in? So a comprehensive stormwater inventory is going to be very helpful for our city staff and for planning for those maintenance needs into the future. Also, a flood warning system is already being implemented in Norman. There's already someone under contract to put that into place. And then also a watershed sediment transfer study. So that is a huge issue facing specifically the Lake Thunderbird watershed, is how much sediment is being moved downstream from disturbed earth upstream. We need to know, and there's been studies that have been initiated that have been on a more academic level. Actually, Dr. Russ Dutnell on our subcommittee did his dissertation on a sediment transfer study of the Lake Thunderbird watershed. But that needs to be moved from an academic study into more of a practical, how do we apply this to the city? What BMPs are most applicable to maintain a normal level of sediment transfer? Because we're always going to have bed movement, that channel material is always going to be moving in the Lake Thunderbird watershed. But what is excess and what that needs to be controlled as it leaves our development sites. Like Cole mentioned, the Garber-Wellington Aquifer there's been studies that have shown positive recharge areas, and we need to incorporate that into the discussion of BMPs, stormwater best management practices on our developments, and consider that a feasibility of potential infiltration areas. There is a USGS wetland inventory that we will include as a discussion point in our stormwater master plan, understanding where those existing wetlands, those existing major wetlands are in the city, which as you can see is primarily in the Canadian River Valley and on the fringes of Lake Thunderbird, the upstream fringes of Lake Thunderbird. Fortunately, these are not going to be impacted by our current development zone as it is drawn right now, but that doesn't include all of the wetlands in Norman. This is just the ones that can be identified through settlement imagery and things like that. The USGS has identified. These wetlands are being and will be identified as development is doing the preliminary engineering study in each of the proposed development areas. Another thing that we want to make sure is considered is our tree cover, our tree canopy, especially as we move further east in Norman. That gets into that cross timbers area that is so valuable to that cross timbers ecology that's so valuable to Oklahoma and Norman as well. We would potentially recommend that a certain percentage of forested area is maintained specifically in those water quality protection zones, but for the entire development as a whole. And this table kind of shows what was included in the Plan OKC plan. And we do want to emphasize that there is a tree protection ordinance already in place in Norman. That is going to be very important to maintain as we develop further east and get into some of those areas that have more tree cover. So going into some of our methodologies, I want to make sure we're still doing good on time. So we updated some of our methodology looking at the hydrology and hydraulics for the city. We took some of the larger subbasins that you can see in black that were developed as part of the previous study and made those a lot more dense and smaller subbasins so that the city has a great idea of like if water falls here, where is it going in our watershed? How does it get out of the system? So we've updated these drainage areas based on updated LIDAR and made them more dense. We also updated some of the hydraulic modeling based on 2018 LIDAR. The detailed hydraulic models are shown in blue here. The ones in the Lake Thunderbird watershed were updated based on 2018 LIDAR. The ones in the pinkish salmon color are ones that have been updated recently by other consultants that we are inventorying for the city. And the ones in blue, that's Merkle Creek and Bishop Creek, are ones that were completely reconstructed by Garber based on the information that we knew. We also looked at the stormwater protection zones, or the stream planting corridors, the water quality protection zones. And we want to update those based on more up-to-date data that FEMA has developed through the base level engineering process. And so that's a lot of technical jargon there, but basically FEMA has done more rigorous and more topographically accurate studies using base level engineering processes that we can now use to update the stream planting corridors in East Norman. It is striking how close the FEMA data is to what was drawn in 2009. It was truly impressive how close and how accurate their methodology was based on the information they had back in 2009. But you can see the white lines on this map are what FEMA drew based on USGS contour maps, probably 40, possibly even 50 years ago. Those are mostly outdated. It would be a recommendation as well to update those regulatory FEMA maps further out in the watershed as well, in the Lake Thunderbird watershed. Another thing we wanted to mention was our public input. So we took these stormwater boards that you can see here to our neighborhood workshops, and we also went with one of the month surveys. Was the same question of how would you rank these 4 criteria in stormwater, how would you rank them in importance based on the stormwater project? In evaluating stormwater project, how would you rank these criteria? And ecological improvement by far came out as the citizens, the public's highest priority. And so that really feeds into our potential recommendations on really being serious about protecting that water quality, specifically as our land development, our current development areas that on that policy map are moving further into the Lake Thunderbird watershed. So this ecological improvement is going to be very important for stormwater projects moving forward. We also wanted, in that vein of ranking the projects, we looked at the evaluation criteria matrix that was developed in 2009, and we got with our subcommittee to make recommendations on how to improve those evaluation criteria. We reweighted some of those evaluation criteria. We didn't change the actual criteria very much, but just put different weights on those. So we'll be able to rank those projects in a way that is more true to the desires of the subcommittee and the public, based on that table we just saw. And so now I want to move into some of those stressors. We've kind of been mentioning it all the way through, but some of the stressors that would be encountered by this current development area in the Lake Thunderbird watershed. So many of you kind of understand this graph, but I'm going to explain it so that those who have never seen something like this understand what's going on. So this is what's called a hydrograph. And so a hydrograph shows the flow rate, which is on the y-axis. So that's a volume of water per second moving through an area per time. And so how that flow rate increases and decreases per time. And a natural area in this graph will be represented by what's in red in this graph. So the sort of middle graph here represents what could be considered a natural hydrograph for this case study. But when we add a lot of impervious area, remove vegetation, remove evapotranspiration, a lot of that water hits the design point much quicker. And that peak flow rate, that rate of water moving through the area, is much higher. So that's what you see by the dark blue line, is that's what's happened in the watershed, specifically in the Canadian River. Like Richard mentioned, there's no detention. There's very little detention happening in like the Imhoff Creek watershed. And so you see a lot of consequences of that water hitting Imhoff Creek very quickly. There's degradation in that stream, and that has also happened in the Little River watershed as well. We're going to see a picture of that here in a minute, but essentially this is what's called Simon's Channel Evolution Model. This is what happens to natural streams as you add that peak flow rate that is increased due to impervious area if you don't have detention. So hold on, I want to go back to this. The blue is sort of the target based on the engineering design criteria that I have listed here. So the engineering design criteria requires that the peak flow rate at the design point be equal to or less than the existing conditions flow rate. Now that doesn't speak to volume. There would still be excess volume that moves through the area due to that impervious area, due to not having infiltration or evapotranspiration. And that's why you see a difference in the light blue line than the red line. So the red line is, again, natural conditions. The light blue line is detained conditions where we're meeting the engineering design criteria, but there is still excess volume moving downstream. And so that excess volume is going to be what your water quality volume is reducing. So you're reducing how much water volume is moving down through the hydrograph. And this is that channel evolution model. It's really best shown in this image right here. This is Sooner Road as it crosses Little River. And so that channel evolution model, take a look at how that channel is very wide and the trees are gone from the banks. downstream of 12th Avenue, and that is happening all the way down to the lake. And so, but upstream, you've got trees on the banks. You can tell that the bed has degraded a little bit. You can see some sand and sediment there in the bed. And really, what we're looking at here is is that channel evolution happening in real time. And this is what we want to prevent in our other streams in the Little River, Lake Thunderbird watershed. And so we essentially have, if you take a look at stage 3, that's what's happening on the upstream side of the road, on the left side of the picture, and then stage 4 and 5 is what's happening on the downstream side of the road, where that channel bed has degraded and those channel sides are starting to slump in and to slough in into the channel. You get widening, and that's going to be happening in all of our streams in East Norman if we don't adhere to these engineering design criteria that are included in the engineering design criteria right now, but need to be upheld. So that was just sort of a technical focus on kind of the issues that face Norman. And so that moves us into some of our recommendations. We have continuing recommendations from the 2009 plan. We kind of split up. We have a long list of recommendations that are kind of split up into continuing recommendations and new recommendations. I'm not going to go through each one, but this is how we split them up, sort of into sections. The ones that are continuing from 2009 kind of match up with the sections that were in the 2009 master plan. And obviously, one of the biggest ones was funding. So, bringing on additional funding for stormwater maintenance and stormwater quality through a stormwater utility fee, addressing some of those gaps in funding for the stormwater capital projects through a stormwater bond. Both of those things are essential and will be continued through this plan. And then these are some of the new ones that we have addressed through our subcommittee. So looking at how the engineering design criteria can be improved, the FEMA community rating system, that goes into that flood warning system, and that can actually lower the flood insurance premium for all of the citizens in Norman that pay FEMA flood insurance. Looking at the water quality protection zone ordinance, the LID incentivization, making sure that construction site inspections are well funded and well supported by the city staff and city council, making sure that when enforcement has to happen, that is supported by staff and by city council, and then also adding water quality monitoring locations that would be able to give us a picture of. Well, I'll get into that in the next slide. We'll kind of show that better. But I'm going to go through 3 of our recommendations here. One was the water quality protection zone, and so adding in the water quality volume into this water quality protection zone ordinance would be critical. Would be a high recommendation, so that water quality volume is captured and treated on the development site before it moves into the downstream watershed, and also to limit the clearing and grubbing and the removing of trees within that water quality protection zone, providing that riparian buffer, leaving the riparian buffer in place instead of clearing it for construction. There's currently no requirement that it remain in place during construction. So this is that water quality monitoring stations. We want to recommend that water quality monitors go in place in locations that will be critical to as this development moves into the eastern part of Norman. You can see those red dots where we were supposed to put those for now. Then also taking into account infill development and that increased impervious area that's going in through potential ordinances like the ADU ordinance, that alternate dwelling unit, am I saying that right? Alternative dwelling unit. Accessory, sorry. Where we're adding impervious area into locations that already have stormwater issues. We want to make sure that retrofits are considered and studied before we get more impervious area into those Canadian River watershed primarily, like core Norman areas, and also making sure that appropriate stormwater BMPs are implemented for these infill developments. And then, of course, I want to just bring us back to the stormwater utility fee. The gap in funding in 2018, there's been a lot of citizen input through the Stormwater Citizen Committee and other committees to look into the rates and the things that go into a stormwater utility fee. In 2018, the gap in funding was $4.3 million, and that has only gotten more since then. The gap in funding for stormwater maintenance and stormwater quality protection. So You know, we can see we're far behind a lot of much smaller cities in Oklahoma as far as the stormwater utility fee. We need to get that done, and that is a very high priority, and that's one of our biggest recommendations. So that's the end. Maybe
Great job. While it's fresh in your brain, if you have questions pertinent to what you just heard, write them down so you don't forget. Because A, you can email them, or B, we can start this discussion next time to make sure we get those questions. So write them down, don't forget. That's it.
In old Oklahoma, beneath the western skies, where folks all say, hi stranger, and friendship never dies.